Welcome to Behind the Scenes, the podcast where we delve into the diverse perspectives of the brilliant minds at Entura, one of the world's most experienced power and water consulting firms. This podcast comes to you today from Nipaluna, Hobart, the traditional country of the Moina people of the Southeast Nation. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people and their ongoing connection to culture and country, and the traditional owners of other lands people are joining from today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today. Join us as we explore the stories of talented individuals shaping a sustainable future, discover who they are, uncover the intricacies of their role, and explore what drives their passion. Get ready for an insider's view into the heartbeat of Entura and the journey toward a more sustainable tomorrow. Dr. Andrew Wright is a senior renewables engineer at Entura. His impressive career spans more than 20 years, from his early days commuting to university with his dad to studying and working on aerodynamics projects across the US. Andrew returned to Australia to study a PhD in wind energy, lured by nice beaches and a great mentor. Andrew has been on the wind journey now for over 20 years. He's looking forward to the future of wind and renewables across the Indo-Pacific. As well as an engineer, Andrew is a husband, a father, and an athlete. Dr. Andrew Wright, welcome.
Hi, Mark.
First question is always the same. Who are you?
Well, it's nice to be here, Mark. So I will start off by saying I'm a dad. It's the first day of school today. First day of high school, in fact, in our household. So it's a big day.
Very exciting.
I'm a runner. That's something that's come to me midlife and is a big part of my life at the moment. And I'm an engineer, a consultant, and I help people develop and build renewable energy projects.
Fantastic. That's a full plate right there. Let's go right back to where you grew up.
Well, I'm from Melbourne.
Okay.
So the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Pretty sort of, well, everybody's own upbringing is normal, but it was living in the burbs, progressing through school, and I went to university in Melbourne as well, to Monash Uni. Mm-hmm. My father was an academic there, so I rode to university in his car. He went off to do his science and I studied engineering.
Going through school, did you have a natural kind of draw towards problem solving, towards mathematics, towards that engineering, or was there a bit of a journey to get to engineering?
Look, I had a natural inclination towards sort of the sciences, so sciences and engineering, I'd say. Mm-hmm. I loved sport, wasn't much good at English, but okay. And I didn't really know any engineers, and like as I said, my father was a scientist, so I sort of, in my mind, I was doing that sort of science engineering thing. I enjoyed it in school. I had good teachers. I was really lucky, I think, the schools that I went to. And to some extent, I fell into it. It wasn't a drive. Knowing exactly what engineering was. This is what I wanted to do. But it seemed to be a way to sort of pursue that interest in a way that was rooted in the society more than the sciences, perhaps. I think that's why I ended up in engineering.
So the practical side rather than the
practical side, things I could see going around me. I had interest. I was mad keen into sailing, small boats. So that sort of drew me towards engineering. Drew me ultimately towards doing sort of mechanical engineering and fluid dynamics and aerodynamics and that sort of thing. That, as much as anything, drew me towards where I am now. And
was your father being an academic? Was he supportive of that practical route?
Yeah, absolutely. He should have been an engineer, to be honest.
Right.
And look, I could see that science. It's, to me, my perception at the time was science was a hard road. You were trying to get funding. You had, mainly in institutions like universities, and it was high pressured, trying to publish. Not as practical, obviously. Well, to my perception as engineering was. And yeah, probably I could just see that it was going to be a fun career at that point.
Choosing the university course, there wasn't, I understand, a renewables engineer as there is now, or renewables engineering as there is now. So what was the pathway into that?
Yeah, okay. Certainly wasn't. So I guess my origin story of how I got to renewables is a little bit windy. So as I said, I was into aerodynamics. I got the travel bug while I was at uni, did a bit of that. I ended up on an exchange program in the US. I ended up going back there once I graduated as a mechanical engineer. But I knew what was happening in the US was cool, so I worked with a small firm attached to the university there, initially doing sort of research engineering, supersonic wind tunnel testing, improving aircraft engine aerodynamics, improving the aerodynamics of missiles was a project that was going on while I was there. And I was earning a lot of money for someone straight out of university. The Australian dollar was horrible at that point, so the US dollar was worth an amazing amount to a 22-year-old. All was great, except that we were looking at missiles and again working on research projects, which funding was uncertain. So I actually got made redundant around about the time that I heard a lecture at the university from an American called Ralph Nader, who was he was a perennial Green Party candidate, like the original Green Party candidate in the US, which isn't much of a thing and still isn't much of a thing, but he was a consumer advocate, and he was challenging at that university, challenging students to think about what they could do with their engineering degree that was more than just the sort of the military route or the typical things that engineering university was offering. So I remember actually literally going to the library and finding a book on wind turbines and thinking, well, what are these things? These are cool. These are sort of what I'm doing, aerodynamics. How do I get into this?
Yeah, so that's an interesting kind of journey there, isn't it? You got into mechanical engineering. Something's obviously drawn you to the mechanical side. Then going into an industry, and you've clearly had a bit of this is great work, it's great money, but is it fulfilling? What's the other part of it? And then moving into that, or starting to explore, I suppose, which would have been on the front edge of the wind turbines, the renewable energies. How did you then move from that original kind of spark of this might be something to look into to then go through and do the next step?
Yeah, well, I ended up doing a PhD in wind energy, essentially, in Australia at the University of Newcastle. So I didn't know how to get into the industry. As you say, it wasn't much at the time. And I wanted to, at that point, I realised I also was still really interested in the research side of things. And what I'd been doing in the US had felt rushed and very results driven. The testing that I'd been doing, the programs, while interesting, there was a lot of pressure there. And I could see that I wanted to actually, I would value the time that you get when you do a PhD to spend some time thinking about a topic and researching the literature and understanding it thoroughly before then working out exactly how you're going to contribute to the field. So that attracted me to that. Plus also just living by the beach in Newcastle sounded amazing compared to where I was in the centre of the United States of America. So that's sort of the way I made my way back to Australia, back to Newcastle.
And going through that PhD process, was it what you thought it would be? I.e., did you have the time? Did you get into the depth that you were hoping to get into, or was it the experience different to what you'd expected it to be?
I'd say it was pretty close to what I expected. I felt like I had a lot of control to make it what I wanted, and I was very fortunate in that sense. I saw others who didn't. So finding a great supervisor was very important. So I was very fortunate who I ended up with there. He was a guy called David Wood at the University of Newcastle. So I knew he had some interesting topics. That's partly what drew me there. But, I had a lot of freedom to find within that space what I wanted to do, to essentially design my own PhD, which involved a bit of practical side. So it involved wind tunnel testing, which I'd already had experience in. It involved installing a small wind turbine on the roof of the engineering building and doing experiments on that, and then sort of doing computer modelling, comparing the practical things with the computer modelling that I was doing. And so it was a wholly positive experience for me.
Great. So you finished the PhD. You're off into the big wide world to find somewhere to ply your trade. What happens next?
Well, I came to Tasmania. So I brought an American over from the US and married her, and looking for a place that suited us, and Hobart was that place. So I came down the end of winter to Hobart, and wasn't scared off enough to reject the offer of a job I got at the time. It was Hydro Tasmania Consulting, so the consulting business of Hydro Tasmania.
Which then, just for clarity, that's now Intura.
That is now
basically
Intura,
taken into
exactly.
Intura, yeah. So again, what sort of time frame are we talking here? Or what sort of year?
2005, 2006.
2005, yeah.
Yeah.
So a good 20 years ago.
Well, it is 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I started working on projects that were just being commissioned, wind farms that were being completed in 2005, 2006, and now at 20 years of lifetime. So that's a whole nominal lifetime of a wind farm now that I've been with this business doing this type of work.
Again, how exciting. So coming in as a young engineer, an interest in this industry, that's drawn you to do the PhD, and you've landed in a business that's doing some, I assume at the time, some pretty bold things, right?
Yeah. Both, I guess. The actual process of developing a wind farm was still quite new. There were lots of sites identified. We'd done a lot of wind mapping. I was brought in particularly to do a lot of data analysis type work. I mean, that was the engineer that I was. I'd done a lot of that in my PhD. So we were running models of wind maps across Australia. We were still identifying sites, measuring wind resource and assessing what the power output of potential wind farms would be at those projects. So there was a lot of that going on. It felt, that whole prospecting phase of development is, honestly, it's fun. Pretty quickly I was trotting off around the place to, empty paddocks, but, flying in helicopters and meeting interesting people and working out whether projects could happen in particular places, both in Australia and Hydro Tasmania. And Hydro Tasmania's joint ventures was also doing projects in India and in China and in New Zealand. So I went to all those places looking at potential projects.
And that's a really interesting thing, again, for a young engineer to get in the thick of this kind of, will you tell me, is it the cutting edge for our region of what we were looking at doing and the scale that we were looking at doing things, not just within Hydro Tasmania, but in that whole region? It was.
And Hydro Tasmania was very active in across Australia, as active as anyone in identifying sites. And I think we had, upwards of 50 monitoring masts around the country we were recording data at. Many of the wind farms I see now, some still in development, some getting built, are sites, projects that sort of were names back then that we might have seen, or some we identified, others built. My colleagues who were with Hydro Tasmania even before me, in the sort of 5 years preceding that, would have worked on and found originally. So it felt still quite, back then it was quite a small community of developers out there. I guess it was not the Wild West, but it was, it felt like there was a lot of opportunity.
And look, that's shifted significantly from them to now. What are the major things that you've seen change in that space?
Well, yeah, I think it has. So there's less, the opportunities are different now for people who want, I guess, for developers and owners, they're different. So it's much more difficult now to find a site and say, I'm going to develop a wind farm and find a greenfield site and start from scratch. A lot of that's happened now. Projects have got bigger as well. So as the technology's evolved and the need for bigger projects has grown, the sites are larger. There's still a long time in development, and they always have been. So you will see that the various aspects of the development, such as the grid connection process and the planning process, just can take a long time. So that hasn't changed a lot. So some things similar, some things have changed.
The change in the environmental approval process, the community engagement, the heritage process, that's evolved massively over the last 20 years, right?
It has, yeah. It's probably, it's certainly, I'm thinking that the stakeholder engagement process has matured. I guess there's probably more variability back then about how it was done between different parties. I like to think the clients that we've had typically have always had put it as a high priority to get the community on side and to manage the environment and the approvals processes well. So that, I guess, from what I've seen, that hasn't necessarily, the actual actions that people are taking haven't necessarily changed, but there's a lot more maturity and expectation now from the community and society as a whole about how it's done, and there's better guidelines and consistency, I think, across the industry.
The journey over the life of a wind farm, as you've mentioned, you've been there right at the very beginning, and now we're kind of coming towards end of life for some of these, or end of functional life for some of these wind farms. What have you seen being the major challenges and opportunities as the farm progresses through its life cycle?
I guess we are seeing some of the original projects reaching the point where decisions have to be made about the future, and they're not easy to make. So I do see owners struggling to, I guess, plot a strategy moving forwards, because it's quite a complex process, which involves, I guess, the financial considerations of what the market's doing in projections of the power prices and weighing that against sort of the estimates of what it'll cost to either maintain a project or start from scratch. So it's almost like it's the problem around getting a new project off the ground, but with the additional complexities that you've actually already got an option there to do something with the existing one. So it's quite a complex decision there. So I do see that some owners are still working out how to do that and looking for examples elsewhere. So I guess we look to Europe a little bit, because there's I guess they're a bit more mature there as an industry. They've had turbines for longer, so they're dealing with things like smaller turbines that they're taking out and replacing with larger turbines. So we're still in the early stages here of really whether it's going to be a case of continuing to maintain the existing asset or to replace them with new ones. I think at the moment it's still not it's not a clear-cut decision, I think, when to retire a wind farm.
And the complexity that you've alluded to with that from a whole of project point of view, but also from a technical point of view, with the output that the turbines can output.
Yep, energy output.
Physical size.
Yep. There's the safety issues as well. Like, at what point do you make a decision that the risk of turbine failure, component failure is at a point where it tips the scales towards just taking assets down and replacing them with new ones? There's issues around, do you need to go through the new development process or a new grid connection process, and it's also valuing what is the value of an old wind farm is something which I guess investors are trying to work out as well, both for the old ones but also the new ones that are being built. And how do you project 20 years from now what the site's going to be worth, what a power price is going to be, and what are the costs of redeveloping a site going to be? They're very difficult questions to answer. Really, yeah.
Yeah. And how has the rise of BESS, battery energy storage systems, changed how we can look at a wind farm and what the outputs of that wind farm may be?
The last couple of years has seen obviously a lot of large-scale BESS being proposed and developed and built in Australia, and a lot of that is now being coupled with solar. So we're still at the early stages of large-scale BESS and wind being developed together. So I think there's still, I certainly think that's going to happen, and I think that'll be part of every project that goes forward, that you will see that combination. It's certainly in some countries. So when I was in India for a conference sort of 18 months ago, very much they were talking about coupled BESS and wind, because in India they often have a very strong profile of wind that peaks during the day and then dies off. So there's a sort of a duality there where they can charge batteries and then they can use the same connection to discharge during the low wind period. So here it's a bit more. In Australia, many places we still have a wind output which is varies based on the weather systems that are passing by. So it's not as obvious the use of BESS with wind as it is with something like solar or with a wind resource that peaks and dips during the day.
Let's pick up on some of the international work that you've done. Run me through some of the exciting projects that you've been involved in and the impact that those projects have had on particularly in the local communities.
Well, so the early years of my career, we did a lot in India, and I found that personally very interesting and satisfying. They were large projects, but they were large projects which were in quite remote places in India. So it felt like, and they were places which were, from what I could understand, receptive to development such as wind farms, and they wanted power and they were keen to get development in their area. And so it seemed like it was a positive for the communities, and I guess for India as a whole, who were just very power hungry to lift a lot of their population out of poverty. So that was really interesting period for me. I guess there's also the small scale hybrid wind solar battery solutions, which obviously Intura is very strong in delivering to places in the Pacific and to mining towns. And I guess I was fortunate enough to go to Antarctica as a part of a project down there. So I guess for us, the most obvious impact of these projects is to just reduce the reliance on diesel, which has a very direct environmental benefit, reduces the number of resupply ships that need to go to these islands in the Pacific to take diesel, which is otherwise it's the fuel source for these isolated communities.
That's right. And look, I want to pick up on two ends of the weather spectrum there and talk a little bit about the Pacific Islands, but then also about Antarctica. The network of islands throughout the Pacific and the current system of generation, just run through a little bit of what was and where it's come to and what the impacts have been there in terms of reductions.
Yeah, so we've been working in the Pacific for about 10 years. I say we, my colleagues at Intura, and largely my colleagues the last 5 to 10 years. So I went to the island of Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia, and that was probably 10 years ago now, and that was one of our early projects in the Pacific. So at that point, I don't recall them having really any solar or wind. And that was an early project to basically look at their existing diesel-fueled power station, very noisy, quite old, requiring constant resupply of diesel, and looking at how they could add both rooftop solar, ground-mounted solar, wind turbines to substantially, reduce the amount of fuel. So I don't have figures off the top of my head, but taking something that was previously 100% reliant on diesel and reducing it to 50% reliant on diesel, that sort of magnitude of change has typically been seen across these sorts of islands.
What a fantastic result. Do you see a time that we can get to 100% renewables?
Oh, we can get close. I don't know about 100. Like, we do need, I guess, it gets progressively more expensive, and more infrastructure is required to get 100%. So there, it's a case of diminishing returns. You can invest a lot to get, or you can invest a reasonable amount to make very substantial gains across, a wide area. To get that close to 100 is something which is difficult. That's not to say they don't operate at times 100% on renewables. They do, some of these places. And particularly with the battery technology coming now, that's really made it a lot more feasible to get closer to 100%. So I guess as battery costs come down, it'll be easier and easier to get sort of closer to that 100% figure.
There would have been a very unique set of challenges in trying to do this work in Antarctica.
Yeah, well, there's certainly some challenges unique to Antarctica. Bit of experience in the far north as well, of very, very cold conditions, but yeah, particularly demanding in Antarctica because supply is so difficult. The logistics that sort of the people that we were working with Antarctica, New Zealand, very reliant on, I guess, the weather to actually get there, and the demands placed on resources are incredible. To me, being there, it was amazing how tenuous a grip on the place it felt. It's fully supported by this air link and the occasional ship, with things having to be planned years in advance.
And how did you find the actual wind resource down there?
Literally with an anemometer, and you stick it up and it measures it. That's how you find it.
Well done. But how was it comparative to other places around?
Well, actually, in sort of Ross Island, where the New Zealand base is, and also the American base, McMurdo, it's good. It's not exceptional in the way that I know the Australian Antarctic Division in Mawson has had wind turbines there. They've got wind resource that's sort of best on the planet, sort of stuff. Ross Island is a bit more standard, sort of very good wind resource. Pretty dry as well, dry cold. So challenging, but certainly challenging to build things in that environment. I don't envy the technicians who have to get out there and tighten bolts in minus 40 degrees. I can't imagine that myself.
Changing gears, you mentioned that you've always been a bit of an athlete. You did some sailing in the early days, and more recently you've gone pretty heavily into running. How did you come to this running, and what does it give you?
Well, I love being outdoors, Mark. So I loved my bushwalking. I've come to terms with the fact that I like competing in middle age. I don't have to win. I like to win, but and that's sort of, I realised that in my consulting work as well. I mean, consulting is really interesting because you compete, but you also serve. So there's this sort of interesting dynamic that happens there. And I've enjoyed competing in my running and just general endurance sport. So I've come to terms with the fact that I get enjoyment from pushing myself in ways that I maybe didn't when I was younger. I can't really explain why that comes on in middle age, but it does in some people, and it has in me. So yeah, I just love getting out, running, riding on the water, in the water. I still love bushwalking too.
And you do a specific type of running where it's not just road running. It's increased degree of difficulty from that, correct?
Oh, some is. I do it all, I think, but I get out there on the trails, and I love the row gaining, where you have to. It's a bit like orienteering, where you find waypoints in the bush, have to navigate yourself, have to plan your own route. I mean, I love just getting off track when I'm bushwalking, and I'm just wandering and essentially getting lost, but not really worrying about it.
And how long are these row gaining races?
Well, the big ones are 24 hours, and I did an adventure race last year, which was a 5-day event. So that was a 500 kilometre event that I did with a colleague from Intura. So hope to do more of them. They're fun. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. So certain sort of fun.
So thinking about the renewables team, what are you seeing in the team now and how has that changed over the last 20 years?
Well, so the renewables team has always been very dynamic and flexible to respond to, I guess, what's happening in the industry. So we started out doing a lot of wind projects, and we started out doing a lot of feasibility. As they moved towards construction, we've got more involved in construction. Solar has come on big time, obviously, in the last 5+ years, and now batteries. So the thing that hasn't changed is the renewables people are always very flexible to adapt, and it's quite a dynamic sort of industry, renewables, because it has happened relatively quickly in terms of what typically happens in an engineering field. So I guess I'm seeing now that the people coming into the team, they have a specific passion for renewables, and a lot of people do, and really pleased to see how much they want to learn, how open to new things they are, and I guess as flexible as they are too, because we still need to be, because the industry goes in cycles. So batteries have been pretty big the last couple of years, but there'll be a time where wind projects start getting financial close and being developed, and we'll I guess with our long experience in that, we'll move back onto wind projects. So I guess I see with the young people in the team, they're much more focused on renewables than we were. So when I started, it was mining engineers and telecommunication engineers and mechanical engineers like myself, and now you've got lots of very enthusiastic young people wanting to do renewables.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that the universities have responded and created a renewables engineering pathway. Have you seen a shift in the approach from those people that have done the renewables training versus the older way of doing it, doing a standard engineering and then moving into renewables?
No, I haven't seen a shift in approach. I guess what I'd say is that even if you haven't done a renewables course, that's not a reason not to get into renewables. People with electrical, civil, mechanical degrees are highly desirable. You don't have to go into a renewables team either. I mean, my work, it feels like the real engineers I work with are often in the civil and the structural and the electrical teams, and they're doing things. They're helping design and build substations and other aspects of the energy infrastructure which are critical to renewables build out as well. So that's very important. So I'd say don't limit yourself to thinking you need to actually be working literally on a wind turbine, which is what my daughter has, I think, for a long time thought that I did, but it's much wider than that. It's the whole infrastructure that goes with it that the industry needs people to work on.
So we've talked about the shifts over the last 20 years. Where do you see the industry going in the next 5 to 10?
Well, there's a lot to be done. So I think that there's still is a need for people from outside the industry to come and join and provide their talents to the industry to help develop and build projects. I see projects getting bigger. There's, I guess, every year you hear of a new larger wind project or a new larger solar farm. I think we touched on repowering, so there's some of those decisions need to be made about what to do with the older sites and to repower them. And then there's offshore wind, which is sitting out there as a potential in Australia. It's obviously happened elsewhere in the world, and we're still talking about sort of the first project that might happen. There was an announcement in the last week or two about an auction process in Victoria. So Victoria is probably the most likely first site for an offshore wind farm. So I guess we as Intura are looking at ways that we can be involved in that new side of the industry.
Very exciting times.
Definitely, yeah.
That's all our time for today. Dr. Andrew Wright, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. It's been a wonderful chat. All strength to your arm.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey behind the scenes at Intura. We hope you've gained valuable insights into the incredible individuals driving a sustainable innovation. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations as we continue to explore the people and stories shaping our sustainable future. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook and find out more about the work we do at insura.com.au. Until next time, this is Mark signing off from Insura's Behind the Scenes, where sustainability meets inspiration.